Welcome to Forbes Library. Thank you so much for coming out tonight to hear this rescheduled talk. We are so very grateful to Dr. Baker for coming out and giving this talk after, I think, the original evening we had scheduled it. There was a water main break outside the library, and we did not have water. So we do now, and we're happy to have you here. My name is Priya. I'm the head of adult services here at Forbes, and if you have any questions or ideas or thoughts for other types of programs we can have here, please come talk to me afterward. If you need a restroom or a water fountain, those are through the art gallery into the arts and music department, and take a left. For an exit, it'll be the stairs or the elevator through the gallery, take a right. If you have questions at the end, I'm sure there'll be time for Q&A, and to make sure we can all hear each other, I will run around with this microphone so that we can hear our questions. I think that's all I've got to say, so Carrie, come on up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya, and thank all of you for coming out on this beautiful evening. I know we have had a lot of rain, and we're looking towards a lot of rain, and this is like this little window of nice weather, so I appreciate you coming out. So, as Priya said, I teach at Smith College, and I write for Ms. Magazine, and this book, Abortion Pills, U.S. History and Politics, actually grew out of my writing for Ms. Magazine, and I'll tell that story in a minute. But first, I want to let you all know that Ms. Magazine still is published all these years later. For over 50 years, Ms. has been published in a print edition. It does have a lot of online content now, but the print issue comes out 4 times a year. And if you want a free subscription, the QR code is right here. There's also a stack of magazines out there, so just grab one. And the book came out in December of last year, but as you may know from looking at the headlines, this issue is a constantly evolving issue, the legal status of abortion pills and what's happening with abortion pills. So I'm constantly writing for Ms. with each development. Actually, there was a story that went up just today and one 3 days ago, and so I'm still very closely following it. So anyway, both of these are out on the table out there if you'd like to grab one at the end of the program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, although it's really a history. It talks about how the pill was developed in France in the 80s, and then the intense fight to try to get it approved here in the United States. It took 2 decades. And then after that, it was approved, but really restricted. And so I go into lots of detail about that history. But I actually want to frame things in the current moment and to kind of give you a sense of the importance of that history today, post-Roe. So all of you may know, on June 24th, 2022, the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, which was a 1973 Supreme Court decision that established a constitutional right to abortion. 50 years later, without any regard to that long-standing precedent, and with really weak reasoning, in my opinion, they overturned Roe. But the irony is, despite this decision, the number of abortions in the United States has gone up, not down. A bunch of states banned abortion. So all the red states, this is pretty current. Actually, it's current as of when I was supposed to originally give this talk. But it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. About 12 states ban abortion. About 18 states overall ban first trimester abortions in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. 12 at 0 weeks, a couple at 6 weeks, and a couple at 12 weeks. And then a few more later. These over here are states that have protected abortion rights. And some of these, like Missouri, was illegal, but then they have a constitutional amendment that legalizes it. There have been a lot of ballot initiatives that have reversed course. But basically half the states now ban and restrict abortion. So how is it that abortion went up? And I'll just show you this chart. This is from the Guttmacher Institute. This is an interesting history of why it went way up and then went way down. But I'm looking right here. What's happened from in 2020, there were 930,000 abortions. In 2023, or actually I should say 2024, there were 1,038,000 abortions. Abortion went up over 10%. It went up more than 100,000 abortions, despite half the states banning abortion. How in the world? And these numbers are only counting abortions obtained through the medical system. There's a robust system of accessing abortion pills outside of the medical system that's not included in these numbers, and I'll talk about that. So it's like a paradox. How is it that Roe gets overturned, half of states banned abortion, and abortion goes up? Well, I wrote an op-ed, actually, for the Gazette a while ago about that, and if you want, I can answer why I think that's happened. I mean, certainly abortion pills has something to do with it, but there's more factors. Like, banning abortion also restricts access to contraception, and if without contraception, you're more likely to have an unwanted pregnancy, and then you need an abortion. But there's other issues, too. But take Mississippi as one example. In 2020, there were 2,850 abortions in Mississippi. In 2023, Mississippi is the state that brought the lawsuit that made abortion illegal, right? But there's more abortions in Mississippi the year after Dobbs than before, despite the fact that they have an entire ban on abortion. 3,305. So it went up by 500 between 2020 and 2023. Now, there are different kinds of abortions. These dark blue were clinic-based abortions. The light blue were people traveling out of state. So here, the light blue are people traveling out of state, which has gone up by 500. But wait, what's that 1570 up there in yellow? What's that? That's a new kind of abortion that's come about. That's telehealth abortion, provided by providers in states like Massachusetts who are mailing pills to people in Mississippi. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how did that happen? How is it that half the states are banning abortion and abortion's going through the roof, even in states that are banning it? How is that happening? So just generally, I argue there's two primary reasons. The development of telehealth abortion during the pandemic and abortion pills. So you can see the percentage of abortions done with abortion pills really stayed quite low for quite a number of years and then began to climb since Trump got into office, right? It was 39% in 2017. It got up to 63% in 2023, and it's higher today, I'm sure. So, and I'll talk a little bit about why it stayed so low and then why it's sort of spiked in the last few years. Telehealth abortion, like I said, came about during the pandemic. I'll say a little bit more about that. But that's become a greater and greater percentage of abortion. Today, 20% of abortions obtained through the medical system are done through telehealth. And that was 0 in 2020 because the FDA did not allow telehealth abortion. And telehealth is more affordable, more convenient, especially since abortion clinics tend to be concentrated in urban areas far from many people. And it's more, you don't have to drive long distances, get child care, because 60% of people who have abortions already have children. And so we'll talk, this is a big part of why abortion has gone up. Access has increased, despite Dobbs, ironically. So don't want to assume anything. I want to just quickly say what abortion pills are. There are actually two medications. One is mifepristone, and the other is misoprostol. Mifepristone basically interrupts the flow of the hormone progesterone, which keeps a pregnancy going. So you have these hormone receptors in the uterus, and what mifepristone does is basically block those receptors, so the uterus can absorb the progesterone and begins to shed the pregnancy. 24 hours later, you take misoprostol, which is a very commonly available ulcer medication. I suspect there's a few people in here taking miso, or your dog does, because it's used for dogs as well. And it causes contractions and to expel the contents of the uterus. And the FDA has approved this 2-pill regimen for early pregnancy termination, originally for 7 weeks, later for 10 weeks. Doctors in the US are prescribing it through about 14 weeks. It's very safe, and they did that in 2000. Danco is the maker of the brand name. GenBioPro is the maker of the generic, which was approved under the Trump administration in 2019, which is very interesting. I asked questions about that when I was doing my research. So what about safety and effectiveness? The antis will tell you, oh, it's really dangerous. In fact, the combination of mifepristone and misoprostol is 95% effective and is an extremely safe way to end an early pregnancy. They are safer than Tylenol. They should be available over the counter, and the only reason they're not is because of anti-abortion politics. Misoprostol alone can also be used for termination of early pregnancy. Around the world, in countries that ban abortion, they use misoprostol. Because it's cheaper than mifepristone and widely available. In some countries, it's available over the counter. Actually, it was women in Brazil who first began to use miso alone for abortion. They looked at the bottle and it said, it was over the counter. And so they looked at the bottle and it said, don't use if you're pregnant, may cause miscarriage. It had like a picture of a pregnant woman with a circle and a cross line. And so women began to use it widely. And the health department noticed that the death rate from illegal abortion plummeted. And they're like, what's going on? So they investigated it and they figured it out that women were using miso. So you know what they did? They pulled miso off the shelves. They'd rather have dead women than women who can control their bodies. So I do want to just also note that abortion pills are different from Plan B. People always confuse them. Plan B is an emergency contraceptive available over the counter at CVS, and it's a hormonal medication that prevents the release of an egg from the ovary, and so it prevents abortion, and it cannot cause abortion. Abortion pills cause abortion, and they are only available by prescription. Well, legally only available by prescription. Many people get them outside of the medical system. So just very briefly, this is Étienne-Émile Bauman, a Frenchman who developed, a biochemist who developed. He just died. Did anybody notice that in the headlines? He died about a week ago. I wrote an obituary for him. Yeah, very detailed obituary. So he invented it in 1980, and if you read the book, it's like 4-part harmony. You can read the whole story. It's an interesting story. And then France approved it in 1988, but Bush was the president, and Bush is like, he put an import alert on it and banned it from the country and wouldn't let anybody even test it. And so advocates, and the company that had the pill, it's called Roussel-Uclof, who he had been working with, they said, well, we're not going to bring it to the US because there's a hostile political climate. So Ellie Smeal, who had been the president of NOW, and then created an organization called the Feminist Majority Foundation, decided that she was going to let Roussel-Uclof know how much American women want the medication. So she collected 700,000 petitions. She boxed them up and mailed them to the headquarters of Roussel-Uclof. And then she gathered a group of scientists and experts and marched herself into the boardroom of Roussel-Uclof and said, American women want this. Look at all these boxes. Now, the primary shareholder was actually a German company named, I'm blanking on the name of it. She then picked up all the boxes and went to Germany, Frankfurt, and hoaxed AG, and put all the boxes on their boardroom table and said, American women want this. Please bring it here. But they didn't. But they did get Roussel-Uclof to release the development rights to the Population Council, which was New York-based organization that worked around the globe on family planning issues. And the Population Council was interested in getting FDA approval for mifepristone because they believed that that was sort of the gold seal of approval, and it was critical to save women's lives around the world. Tens of thousands of women were dying from illegal abortions, done procedurally, right? By going into the uterus and either scraping the contents or suctioning the contents of the uterus. Very dangerous, in a illegal context, could introduce infection. So the Population Council was committed to getting it approved by the FDA. It still took years and years and years, but finally in 2020, they got it approved. Here it is, front page. U.S. Approves abortion pill. Drug offers more privacy and could reshape the debate. And so I talk a lot about how people talked about abortion pills in the book. It was really interesting. But these are two covers, the New York Times Magazine cover and Time Magazine. People thought of, it was called RU 486, by the way. So some of you may remember that. It was thought that this is going to change everything. If women could just have a pill and they can get it and go home and use it in their home, and it's private and it's inexpensive and it's convenient, they could do it when, on weekends rather than during the week when they're working or whatever. And, the pill that changes everything. A new, simpler way to use RU486 makes abortion a truly personal and private choice. Now comes the battle, right? The French abortion drug RU486 is finally coming to America. Warning, the social and political side effects will be dramatic. So a lot of people talked about it. This is going to change the abortion terrain. This is going to make all the difference. Well, it didn't initially. It didn't. Actually, it was a quite low percentage for many years. 8 years later, only 17%. Over 10 years later, only 24%. By 2014, only 30%. And the hope had been that all kinds of doctors could prescribe this medication. Your GP, your OB-GYN. But it didn't happen like that for a number of reasons I'll explain in a second. Abortion pills were only prescribed by abortion doctors. And the FDA approval required that they come in person. So it really didn't open access. Unlike many European countries where abortion pills became like 80–90% of abortions very quickly, in the US it stayed quite low for quite a long time. And I'll explain why that is. The FDA, when it approved it in 2000, put the pill under a number of restrictions. First, pharmacies weren't allowed to dispense mifepristone. Only doctors could dispense it. Nurses couldn't do it. Midwives couldn't do it. In order to dispense, the doctors had to register with the drug maker. They had to get on a list. And a lot of doctors don't want to be on an abortion list. Then they had to stock and dispense the medication themselves. They basically had to act as a pharmacy, which is very burdensome and costly. So most OB-GYNs didn't do it. I think by like 2011, only 1% of abortion pills were prescribed outside of abortion clinics. And the FDA required doctors to dispense the medications in person to patients over 2 appointments and then required a follow-up appointment. So you could just go and get a procedural and be done with it, or you could go back 3 times and get your pills. So you can see why people didn't pick it up. And then the FDA recommended use only through 7 weeks. So it really didn't get picked up for a long time. Now, during the actually at the very end of the Obama administration, the FDA began to loosen access to mifepristone. In 2016, they lowered the recommended dosage and allowed usage through 10 weeks. So that was important for a number of complicated reasons that I can talk about later, or you can read about in the book. It also allowed any qualified clinician to prescribe mifepristone, so it didn't have to be a doctor. It could be a nurse, it could be a midwife, it could be a physician's assistant, anybody who's qualified to prescribe medications. That's huge. And then they approved, and this is really important, in 2016, they approved a research study called teleabortion to begin to study, could providers prescribe abortion pills by telemedicine and then mail the pills to patients. And it was a study, and it's so important because 4 years later when the pandemic hit, we had the science showing it was safe. And that convinced a federal court to direct the FDA to lift the in-person dispensing requirement during the pandemic. And then once that happened, we got massive data about how not only was it safe, not only was it effective, but people loved it. They loved not having to travel 8 hours, if you live in rural, if you live down on the Cape where there was you had to drive all the way into Boston to get an abortion, long drive. So, and then I mentioned in 2019, the FDA approved a generic. And I asked the people, I'm like, why did Trump's FDA approve the generic? It's like, well, there was a guy in charge that was like on fire to have more generics, and he wasn't really paying attention to what the drugs were. Isn't that interesting? And it was before abortion pills, it became so clear that abortion pills were critical for access as restrictions were put in place. So, all right, so the pandemic hit, and of course, so there are a number of medications that require in-person dispensing, but usually they're medications where you have an intense reaction, and mifepristone is not one of those. You basically have no side effects at all until 24 hours later when you take the miso. So there are quite a number of drugs, though, that have these in-person dispensing requirement. So when the pandemic hit, Donald Trump's FDA lifted all the in-person dispensing requirements on all the medications except one. Guess which one? Mifepristone. Yep. And so ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and Sister Song, a reproductive justice collective based in Atlanta, filed a lawsuit in Maryland, and they said, it violates Roe versus Wade because you're imposing a substantial obstacle on people's access to abortion by requiring that they go out during a pandemic and go to a doctor's office and expose themselves to COVID. And the lower court judge agreed. And it was like, that was a world-changing moment. I will say that the Trump administration appealed twice, and to the Supreme Court. First time, they batted it back down, but then he appealed again. But in the meantime, all these virtual abortion clinics popped up around the country. And as I said, I wrote for Ms. Magazine. As soon as this started happening, I started calling these doctors and nurses and midwives and saying, so what's this whole telehealth abortion thing? And I did a series of 13 interviews. It's available on my website and on the Ms. website. And it's so funny because I'm like, so how does it work? Like, I just didn't know anything. And I was like, how does this work? And so it's these very detailed interviews asking all these like logistical questions about like what happens, how do they get it, how long does it take, how much do you charge, what kind of payments do you take? But these were some of the companies that I interviewed the founders of: Choice, Forward Midwifery, Carafem, Hey Jane, Full Circle, Abortion on Demand, Aid Access, Just the Pill. These folks are in Minnesota. Actually, I think the next slide, I give you the pictures of all the providers. They were willing to use their names. They were willing to use their pictures. I think it's because they were virtual, they weren't a sitting duck. Or I don't know why. They were just brave. They were just brave. I mean, they were trying something new. They were pioneers. And so they all let me talk to them, and they all told me in great detail exactly how it worked. She was in Indiana, and she was sending pills to the New Mexico border for Texans that came across the border because, remember, Texas banned abortion in 2021. You know, she was in Michigan. She was in California. No, in Washington State. She's the one in Minnesota, Dr. Amen. Anyway, it was such fun. Oh my God, it was so fun. It was just, I just couldn't, it's like I was watching the world shift right in front of me. Like, I was like in the front row getting the, you know, how is this? And it really has been revolutionary. It really has changed things. So this was just great fun. But then Dobbs happened. Actually, let me just back up. Before Dobbs happened, the Supreme Court did reverse the lower court the second time Trump got there. But it was on January 14th, 2021, right before Biden got into office. And so one of the first things Biden did is he said, FDA, rethink that decision. And so the FDA did. In April 15th, they lifted the in-person dispensing requirement. And then in May, Biden said, and by the way, you might think about permanently lifting it, not just for the duration of the pandemic, but forever. Because there's, you know, like, look at the science. And so they did. And in December of 2021, they permanently lifted the in-person dispensing requirement. So all those clinics, all those clinicians, like, they could keep going. And more joined them. So I continued to do all these interviews. I finally stopped because there's so many now. Here in Massachusetts alone, there are 18 telehealth abortion providers. It more than doubled the number of abortion providers in the state when it happened. So, and I'll say a little bit more. Telehealth abortion is much more affordable. Here in the state of Massachusetts, an in-clinic abortion, even just going and getting pills, costs $700. Telehealth abortion, $150. Sliding scale. Because these folks are mission-driven, and they're grant-funded. You know, there's a lot of supporters. That, you know, a lot of the abortion funds are supporting these folks now because it's much more affordable. $700 versus $150, or, you know, $50, whatever the person can pay. And again, they're mission-driven, so that's a lot of the reason why. So, but then 6 months later, Dobbs happened, you know, and so nobody knew what was going to happen. What's going to happen? So post-Dobbs, how are people in banned states accessing abortion? This is what I want to talk about. There's two ways. Some are getting it through the medical system, and some are getting it outside of the medical system. Okay, so what's that? Through the medical system, some are just traveling out of state, just like the old days, right? We know that. The year after Dobbs, 170,000 women and pregnant people traveled outside of their home states to get abortion care, much higher than it had been before. There was a Herculean giving to abortion funds and logistical funds to enable people to travel, and they did. But many couldn't travel. Just FYI, half of women needing abortions live in poverty. Another quarter are low income. A lot, you know, as I said, about 60% have kids. A lot cannot travel. They cannot travel. They can't afford it. They're working minimum wage jobs. They don't have time off. They have kids. They can't afford childcare. I mean, it's just for so many reasons they can't. So this is where telehealth became absolutely critical. Online clinics, US-based and international, began offering telehealth to people living in states with bans. And I'll explain how that happened in a second. But I also want to just give you a preview to the second half, which I haven't really talked about, which is outside the medical system, what some call self-managed abortion, so getting pills yourself and using them. Community support networks grew up around the country. These are pissed as hell grandmothers that remember pre-Roe and are like, never again. And they are taking their very freedom in their hands because they are breaking the law. They are sharing a prescription medication, you know, and they're not doctors. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. And so I'll talk about those support networks. They're, you know, there's no real concrete number, but I will just say they have mailed hundreds of thousands of abortion pills since Dobbs. The other way is websites selling pills. Yes? Most abortion pills are made in India. Most of our medications are made in India. And so they're importing them in large numbers. And every once in a while, customs will get it, but a lot gets through. Yeah. So, raise your hand if you have questions. So, okay, so let's think about this inside the medical system. So some are traveling out of state, but what about the online clinics? How is it we have US-based clinics who can send pills to states with bans? Well, first of all, states that ban abortion are banning doctors from within their borders from providing abortions. No state bans people from self-managing abortion yet. They're always threatening to do it. I thought Texas was going to do it, and then at the last minute they didn't, which was very interesting. And I have opinions as to why. But so we, here in Massachusetts, we did an amazing thing. The month after Dobbs, we passed so a bunch of states passed provider shield laws that basically say if somebody travels from Texas to your state and you provide care, Texas can't sue you for that. And so about 20 states have those provider shield laws. But we slipped in 6 words that nobody else had. And those words are, regardless of where the patient is located. Basically, we extended our provider shield law to allow doctors to prescribe medications by telehealth to people in other states. They redefine telehealth as occurring not where the patient is located, but where the provider is located. These are called provider shield laws. We were the first, but other states followed. Washington, Colorado, Vermont, New York, California, Rhode Island, and Maine now have these telehealth provider shield laws. And these two organizations advocate for them, Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine and Healthcare Across Borders. And they're working to get other states to do this as well. And so quickly, a bunch of providers began to do this. Now, these providers are mission-driven. They are taking a risk, okay? But they are doing it. They are totally doing it. These are the 6 main providers. There's a few others, but these are the biggies. Abuzz Health, Aid Access, the MAP, which is here in Massachusetts. Actually, I'm helping with a fundraiser for the MAP on July 12th. If you want to come, let me know. A Safe Choice, We Take Care of Us, and Choice is Rising. And they also, all of these, and again, they're all sliding scale, $150. Actually, the MAP starts at $5 and up. That's their pay scale, $5 and up. Please pay more. This is what it costs us, but $5. Because they know that people seeking abortion are low income. They can't pay a lot. They're, so, and they provide advanced provision as well. So if you just want to have them on hand in case, they last for 2 years. These providers do that. And they have a 1 to 5 day delivery. Often, you fill out an online form. They screen you for eligibility. If you're eligible, they say, okay, pay your $5 or pay your $50 or whatever. And as soon as you do that, they pop them in the mail. And they're there within 1 to 5 days. By the way, in Massachusetts, for an in-clinic appointment, you're going to wait at least a week to even see the doc. The other thing I wanted to mention is these 6 providers are mailing 10,000 pills a month to states with bans. Just states with bans. Wrap your mind around that. That's 120,000 pills a year. Remember, it was 930 in 2020. So this is like a significant percentage of pills. So anyway, so yeah, that's how they're getting them. And there are some international providers, Abortion Pills in Private and Women on Web. They are a little more costly. They're $95 with 7 to 12 day deliveries for them, and $120 or less with 3 to 5 day delivery. And they offer advanced provision. They serve all 50 states. And the great thing about these folks is no matter what Trump does, these folks are going to continue to mail. So that's important. Okay, what about outside the medical system? So everything we've talked about so far is legal, although Ken Paxton doesn't think so, and I'll talk about that in a second. Ken Paxton is the Attorney General of Texas. But I want to talk about outside the medical system. So this is illegal. It's those grandmothers that are pissed as hell because they remember pre-Roe. A group of, a couple organizations created these community support networks in all states that ban abortion. The major one is redstateaccess.com. There's another one, used to be called Las Libres. These are modeled after abortion pill networks in countries like Mexico when abortion was illegal. So the strategy has been sort of adapted from countries that have bans. And basically, what it is they bring in large numbers of abortion pills. They get volunteers. It's a harm reduction approach, right? They definitely use a harm reduction, if you're familiar with that term, approach. So, and basically their volunteers will, divide up the pills, and then they say, okay, send pills to this person, give all the addresses. They box them up and mail them. And it's a vast system. There has not been a lot of research on how many pills are being dispensed this way, but there was a JAMA study, Journal of American Medical Association, that came out in 2024, May of about a year ago. And it shows, you can see before Dobbs, this is for 2022, before Dobbs, it existed, but not many, about 500 a month. And look what happened after Dobbs. It was 5,000 a month by the end of the year. Went from 500 to 5,000 pills people they were serving by the end of the year. And this has only gone up. And this is just one provider. So this is where you email. If you live in Idaho, you email, you just get on. They use Proton. They're very digitally secure. But let's see, where's Idaho? If you live in Idaho, you email idahoaccess@proton.me, and you just say, you give them your name and address, and they'll mail you pills for free. Nothing. Zip. Free. Okay. What about websites selling pills? So this existed before for a long time. Websites have sold pills for a long time. Actually, the founder of an organization called Plan C, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's been critical to the development of abortion pill access. When they found, do you remember Wendy Davis in tennis shoes on the floor, on the Texas house? She had a catheter and she filibustered for hours to prevent that bill that was going to close half the clinics down. You know, she prevailed in that session, but then the governor called a new session and they put in place the law and closed half the clinics. Folks realized, okay, we're losing abortion, so we need alternative avenues. And that's when Plan C was founded. And one of the first things they did was test these websites to see, do they work? Do they send medication? Is the medication safe? And they found out that it was safe and that they did send. And so they have this robust website testing program, and I'm actually one of their mystery shoppers, where I go on and we have like this big Excel sheet, and they say, okay, buy from here, 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 and track how much it costs and how long it takes, and then when the medication gets there, mail it to us, and they tested the medications in labs to make sure they were high quality, and then they created a list on their website. Here's where you can buy abortion pills, starting with the least expensive up, which created a little bit of a bidding war. So these are some of the sites, and so that didn't pick up quite as quickly, but they are, like I've interviewed people at these companies. They're all based outside, like Private Emma is run by a British guy based in England, and they serve the whole world. They're not just serving the U.S. And again, this is illegal. They're sending prescription medications without a prescription, but I always say, prohibition did not stop drinking. Abortion bans are not going to stop people getting abortions. So that's a really important source. And I will just say, when Dobbs happened, demand for abortion bills went way up, and a bunch of new websites got in on the game, and there was like a bidding war. When I first started testing, like back in 2020, it would cost about $300 to get abortion pills through these websites. In the weeks and months after Dobbs, I watched the Plan C list transform. It went, like, the cheapest went from $300 to $250 to $200 to $150 to $100. I remember when it broke $100 and it was $99, and I'm like, you can get abortion pills for $99 on a website? And then it went further. It went to $75, and it went to $50. It bottomed out at $38. Now they only list sites that provide 1 MIFI and extra meso, so 12 meso. So it's a little higher. It's about 65 last time I checked. But you can go and look. It's on the Plan C website. So what about people that get the pills in this way? What if they need support? How do they know how to use it? Well, there's a lot of information out there about how to safely use abortion pills. For medical questions, there's an organization called the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline. I interviewed them too. And they're staffed by doctors and nurses. They're available all the time, by text, by phone, and they're there. If people say, am I bleeding too much? Am I bleeding enough? Did it work? This is a volunteer thing. It's to support this infrastructure of people accessing abortion pills. How do you find out about information about how to use the pills? Plan C has information on their website. There's another group actually based here in Massachusetts called SAS, Self-Managed Abortion, Safe and Supported. There is also a great subreddit, the abortion subreddit, run by ORS, which is Online Abortion Resource Squad. And then there's even a chat bot. You just say where you live and how far along you are, and it will walk you through all your options, and you'll find answers. There's also logistical and emotional support from Repro Healthline and All Options. And I'm not saying all the resources. These are some of the big resources, but there's constant innovation. Like there's one called Oya, I forget the name of it, but it caters to Spanish-speaking women, Oyo Contigo. And actually it's based in Canada, but it serves Americans. I did an interview with them as well. And anyway, so there's a whole infrastructure of resources to support people self-managing abortion. And remember, 98% effective, safer than Tylenol. Okay, there's also legal help and digital security help. So for legal questions, there's an organization called If, When, How that created the Repro Legal Helpline. So if you're worried about ordering pills and you're worried about, I live in Texas, well, Plan C has information about legal status, but you can just call and talk to a lawyer at the Repro Legal Helpline. They also have a legal defense fund, if, God forbid, you need that. There's also digital security resources. The Digital Defense Fund and the Electronic Frontier Foundation has resources showing how do you search on your phone or on your computer in a secure way. Things like, use Signal rather than, your regular texting. Use Proton rather than, and how to erase your history. There's a lot of things you can do to search safely online. There are some providers that would just take phone calls, so there's no record of anything. I will say places like the MAP they've gone back to paper, and they keep it the minimum time, and then they destroy it because they're very, conscious of wanting to, not subject their people to any sort of legal scrutiny. So Plan C, I mentioned them. This is their homepage. They have a drop-down menu. You select your state, and then a page will come up and it will say exactly who are the telehealth providers, who are the community networks serving your state, what are the websites selling pills, how can you find in-clinic care if you live in a state with in-clinic care. And it's, talks about the support resources, talks about any sort of legal, risks that you might take by using any of these avenues. It's really one-stop shopping. So, how do they spread the word? Well, they've been very creative. They do things like put up billboards in states like Texas. That really pissed off Ken Paxton. And then ran illuminated billboard trucks around states like Idaho and Florida. DeSantis was not happy. But we do still have a First Amendment. You can still talk about this is what people are doing. That's all they're doing. They're just saying what people are doing. They're not telling anybody to do anything. They're just saying this is what people are doing. They do the research. They share the research. So they use a lot of social media. They're experiencing a lot of censorship by Meta and other social media platforms. So they have, right now, I just today published a piece about the Plan C community road trip. They're visiting every state, they're making over 100 stops, and they're spreading word about abortion pills. And so they have a lot of creative ways, and I'll talk more about that if you want to get involved and how to spread the word. I'll talk how you can do that. So there are current threats to abortion pills. The antis are very aware, especially because they read my stuff. And I'm like, I report the really cutting edge stuff. And I'm always thinking, I'm letting them know, but I'm like, yeah, but I want people to know. And yes, they're going to fight it, but it's more important that we not be silenced and that we share the information. But they are fighting like hell to try to restrict access to abortion pills. By the way, they're not going to win. They're not going to win. I mean, they might cause some damage. They will cause damage, but they're not going to stop the flow of abortion pills. Okay, so Texas brought a lawsuit attempting to ban, I should say, a group of anti-abortion doctors in Texas brought a lawsuit. This was in November of 2022, shortly after Dobbs, trying to ban abortion pills nationwide. This is what inspired me to write the book. because they filed the lawsuit, and I downloaded the complaint and read it, and I had been covering abortion pills since 2018, so I knew a fair amount. And they said, abortion pills are dangerous, and I'm like, they're wrong there. And then they said, oh, and the FDA rushed through approval of abortion pills. Well, I wasn't as familiar with the history, and so I'm like, did they? And so I looked around, there was no scholarship on this. And so I was like, I'm gonna write that book, because that book's gonna be important, especially if Trump gets elected the second time. And so I wrote the book. That's what this book is. I happen to have a sabbatical the spring of 2023, and I just cranked it out. Because I'd been covering this and interviewing all those telehealth providers. I mean, I literally, it's the quickest book I've ever written. But so this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and you may remember last summer, the lower court judge, who was an anti-abortion activist appointed by Trump in Amarillo, Texas, where there's one judge, and they chose that district because there was that one anti-abortion judge, and he just defied every rule of law to rule in favor of the plaintiffs. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and even our Supreme Court said, no, this suit's bogus. And they threw it out on standing, the ability, the right of the person to bring the suit. Our radical Supreme Court. I mean, it was such an extreme case. So, but while it was under review up there, 3 states intervened and tried to make another standing argument, including Missouri, which is the state whose population voted to legalize abortion, but the AG is filing a lawsuit to try to get rid of abortion pills. But anyway, that lawsuit's ongoing. But more importantly, the Project 2025, which I covered extensively last year, basically sets out a plan for how to get rid of abortion pills. Get the FDA to reverse. Take the presidency, have the president direct the FDA to pull them from the market. And so that's one strategy. And then the second is to enforce a 1873 anti-obscenity law called the Comstock Law. This is Anthony Comstock. He had his panties in a wad. He went after everybody. He did not like people looking at naked pictures. He didn't like people having sex. And he became the Postal Service, the head of the Postal Service. And he'd rifle through everybody's pornographic mail and go after them. What's that? Oh, yeah, he went after. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so they want to do a completely unprecedented interpretation of the Comstock Act. They want it to be interpreted to ban the mailing of abortion pills. And so everybody in the abortion pill movement's been waiting with bated breath to see if the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is going to bring a case to try to prevent the mailing of abortion pills. She hasn't so far. They've got a lot of problems right now. There's a lot going on. And so, so anyway, but they could. And that could actually apply not only to abortion pills, but to any device used for any kind of abortion. So it would be a backdoor way of banning abortion nationwide without having to ask Congress to do it, or the Supreme Court. It would be very, very devious misuse of law, but they'll do it. They'll try. So what's happened is there's been interjurisdictional abortion wars because some states have legal abortion and allow their providers to serve people in all 50 states, and other states ban it. There's now a conflict going on between states where Texas wants to try to tell people in Massachusetts what to do. So Texas Attorney General sued a doctor with aid access. Remember, one of the telehealth providers? Her name is Maggie Carpenter. I've interviewed her many times. And he brought a civil suit against her. She didn't show up, of course, and he won a $113,000 judgment. He marched himself up to a New York court and slapped it down on the clerk's desk and said, I want to file a lawsuit to get this money. And they refused to let him file it because their provider shield law protects providers from being sued for things that are legal to do in New York. And it's legal to mail abortion pills from New York. So Kathy Hochul said, no and hell no, we are not going to honor this lawsuit. Then Louisiana indicted, sadly for Maggie, they indicted Maggie, criminally indicted Maggie. And once again, Hochul said, no, and hell no. She actually did say that. I think it was on Rachel Maddow. It was very funny. But, you know, New York stonewalling and said, we're not going to, that, you know, what the Shield law did is it prevented any sort of civil or criminal suit, any sort of warrant, any sort of attack on the doctor's license or insurance. And so we're at a standoff. And they haven't filed a lawsuit. You know, I mean, eventually this could get to the Supreme Court, but I mean, I'm waiting, but they haven't filed a law. They're just sort of sitting on their indictment and their judgment so far. And poor Maggie, I mean, she's tough. She knew that this was a possibility. All these Provider Shield folks, they don't travel to Texas, let me just tell you that. They don't leave New York. But they were, again, mission-driven people. And so they, you know, nobody else has been sued or indicted, just Maggie. And, but there are other strategies that states are using. So Louisiana criminalized the possession of abortion pills, which could potentially get people who are sharing pills. They classified them as controlled substances, and they got sued over that because misoprostol is used in childbirth. If you either have, you need help getting your childbirth going, or alternatively, you've already given birth and you're bleeding a lot, you need to have the bleeding stop, misoprostol is the go-to medication. But because it was made a controlled substance, it was 3 floors up in a locked cabinet and took an hour and a half to get, and that's the medication you need in 5 minutes at most. It's that little kit that the doctor has by the childbirth bed with all the emergency things you need if things go south. Miso used to be in that kit, but it's not anymore in Louisiana. So a woman almost died, and now she's suing the state of Louisiana for millions of dollars. So no other states decided to do that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. Another strategy is censoring abortion pill information, and this states are trying to do this, but nobody's passed it yet. South Carolina and Texas introduced legislation basically saying you can't say the A word. You know, you can't talk about abortion, which is, you know, blatantly a violation of the First Amendment. Those bills have not passed, I think, because of that. But social media platforms are also censoring abortion pill information, so that's a real concern. That's a real concern. They also, states have talked about criminalizing the use of abortion pills. I mentioned earlier that no state, you know, when they pass these bans, they're like, women are being taken advantage of by the abortion industry and by evil doctors. And so all the laws are focused at the abortion industry and the doctors, not the pregnant people themselves. And a few states have realized that, you know, what's happening, all these women are getting abortion pills, and there's no law against it. And so they're using creative things like, you know, improper disposal of remains, or, you know, they're using all kinds of, they're trying to go after people. And actually, criminalization has we've been criminalizing pregnant people for a long time, but it has accelerated since Dobbs. Usually, though, it's just people having miscarriages unrelated to abortion pills. But some states have started to talk about banning self-managed abortion. But interestingly, nobody's done it yet. I keep on waiting, right? I don't think I listed the states, but like South Carolina, certainly Texas, I think a number of states have introduced legislation, but none of them have passed it. So, and I think it's because for years they've thought of themselves as protecting and helping women. I mean, even though that's diluted. And so it just doesn't, to go after women, you know, it's unpopular. I mean, actually, all these states like Texas, the majority of voters support abortion rights. Like 60% of Republicans support abortion rights. This is not popular. So I think they've been a little like, how far can we go? So, but like I say, some extremist prosecutors have tried to do this. Okay, but on the other side, so those are some of the efforts to restrict abortion pills, but there's also been a number of efforts to expand abortion pills, so access. So there have been lawsuits, so a number of states like they allow abortion but prohibit telehealth. Or they have other kinds of restrictions like 24-hour waiting periods or, you know, whatever. And so folks are filing lawsuits saying that those restrictions are preempted by FDA. And so you can't require in-person distribution because the FDA said you didn't need that. And the FDA federal law preempts state law and there's a supremacy clause, right? And so there have been a few lawsuits like that, which promise, I mean, they're still in the system, but they promise to potentially expand access. And then just last week, the Illinois Senate joined the Illinois House in passing a law that Pritzker has not yet signed. So I wrote a piece on this earlier this week. On the 10th, Illinois lawmakers pursue creative path to protect mifepristone access, even if FDA revokes approval. So they passed a law saying, basically, if the FDA revokes, we're going to still let our doctors do it, as long as the World Health Organization allows it. Now, you could say, well, isn't the FDA preempting that? Well, it's like states are doing it on the other side, so if you're going to do it on the other side, why can't we try to do it on this side? You see what I'm saying? So anyway, the creative thinking, it's really interesting. So I'm almost done, I promise. So Plan C, there's a documentary, by the way. You can get it, I think, just on like Netflix about the formation of Plan C. Really brave, amazing women. Francine Coito, Elisa Wells. I mean, these amazing women, public health advocates for decades. They were actually the people behind making Plan B over the counter, the contraceptive. And then they turned to Plan C. That's why they called it Plan C. And there's a lot of opportunities to get involved, mainly to get the word out. If you know people in restrictive states, email them and let them know about this. If you have, like, we're from Georgia, I have a ton of Georgia friends, so I'm always posting because then my Georgia friends see it. And you can order these little stickers with a QR code to the Plan C website. There's a lot of ways of getting involved to spread the word about abortion pills. So I interviewed Elisa Wells, who was one of the co-founders of Plan C, shortly after Trump got elected. And I said, Elisa, what's going to happen? Are we going to lose access to abortion pills? And this is what she said to me. Abortion pills are here to stay. Community distribution networks and overseas providers will remain intact, and abortion pills will continue to come into the country. That's what she said. I have been so amazed at how creative, determined, and courageous these women are that have built this movement and that are continuing to fight this fight. So much of the mainstream abortion rights movement, they're good girls. They've had a target on their back. They're skittish. They're afraid to do things. These folks were like, throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Let's reinterpret things. I mean, they're kind of doing what the other side is doing. They're you know how you get frustrated when, like, the other side just makes stuff up? I mean, we're not making stuff up, but we're thinking outside the box. And to me, this book, especially at this time, tells a really encouraging story about these creative, determined, and courageous women. So I have one more slide. Did it change the world? Well, not right away, but it did eventually. It really did. Abortion is more accessible today than it was before when we had Roe. Roe, it was not a good system that we had. It was too expensive. It was too hard to access. It was too, women love abortion pills by telehealth because it's private. You don't have to cross protesters. You don't have to put your feet in stirrups. You don't have to tell people your business. You just order the pills, you get them, you use them in the privacy of your home, with a heating pad and a film and a cup of tea. And it's, it's not for everybody. Some people want to go and just put their feet in stirrups and have it over in 5 minutes, right? And I understand that, but it gives another option. And, it's a workaround. A lot of this is a workaround, but I do think abortion is so stigmatized. The anti-abortion movement has been very successful in making people think it's hard, it's difficult, it's scary. And what people are realizing is, no, it's actually pretty simple. You have Tylenol in your cabinet, you have, Alka-Seltzer, and you have abortion pills if you need them. The movement's now doing missed period pills. You don't even need to take a pregnancy test. If you've missed a period, take them, just to be sure. Miffy can be used as emergency contraception. And also the advanced provision. So there's a lot of creative thinking that has moved the ball forward, forced by what's happened with Dobbs. I talk about it as the unintended consequences. The dog caught the car. So that's it. So when I order the pills, sometimes it comes in a little package like this, sometimes in a package like this, sometimes in a box like this. The ones that you get from abroad look like this, just a little box. This is one Miffy and 4 miso. Most providers, though, are now sending extra miso. Remember when I said it was 95% effective? If you have another 4 miso, it's like 98% effective. And by the way, if you end up needing, in the very rare case that you need to go to the hospital, you can't test for whether somebody took abortion pills. It's a miscarriage. All the symptoms are the same. The treatment is the same. And so if you're somewhere like Texas, you don't mention it. You just say, I'm miscarrying. If you do one of the telehealth providers, this is how you'll get it. We don't have a blister pack here in the United States. So you'll get Miffy in a box, and then you'll get a thing of miso. We're kind of behind the rest of the world. So as far as, we don't have the blister pack yet. So, yes.
Do you know if there's any other states other than Illinois that are trying to
You know what?
do what they just did with the...
It's the first state. It's the first state. That's why I wrote this article 2 days ago. That's how new it is. So I immediately, as soon as my article went up, I sent it to Lindsay Sabadosa, Becca Rausch, Claire Tayuni. I sent it to all of them. So follow up. And they're like, whoa. I mean, nobody in the movement even knew about this. I think it just like somebody's bright idea. And, obviously, I don't know. It's a really creative strategy. And so I'm hoping that we'll do it here in Mass and that more states will do it. So I'm now pumping that article out to everybody in the movement to alert that here's a new strategy, folks. Because, of course, I mean, you may have seen RFK and Macri, who's the head of the FDA commissioner, the head commissioner, just a couple weeks ago said, we're going to review mifepristone for safety. And it was in response to a fraudulent anti-abortion study. It wasn't even a study that claimed that abortion pills were unsafe. There are over 100 peer-reviewed studies showing how safe it is. 7.5 million women have used abortion pills since it was approved in 2000. And there have been fewer complications than Tylenol, like I say. And so it's, that's why this is so important right now, because if they mess with it, or that lawsuit goes anywhere, we will have. And again, the lawsuit, they're only talking about Miffy. So if they take Miffy away, we still have miso. And it's almost as effective. It's a little bit of a harder process because it is just ends the pregnancy with contractions. So you take more misoprostol, and it's very crampy, and it's uncomfortable. Yeah?
I'm just always struck by how inward-looking the U.S. is.
Yeah.
And, what is common across the globe, never hits the paper.
I know. Or we don't think we can learn anything from other people. So Elisa and Francine got the idea to create Plan C because they were in Ethiopia doing research around misoprostol for hemorrhaging post-birth. And they went into a pharmacy and they saw abortion pills available over the counter for $5. And they're like, wait a minute, over the counter, $5? In the US, it's $700 and you have to go to a clinic and make multiple visits. How is this? And that's what kind of enabled them to think outside of the box. And, these networks, these community networks, they are relying heavily on networks that have been available in South America. So I mentioned the women in Brazil who realized, so they immediately went to, in 1990, they went to a conference in Argentina and they spread the word. It went like wildfire across South America because at that time, every country in South America banned abortion and women were dying left and right. And so as soon as they figured that out, they told everybody. And so they developed these underground networks to share misoprostol so that people didn't have to do procedurals, they could do the pills, and they developed really sophisticated networks, and that's what we are relying on now, is some of those strategies. There's direct communication between US activists and activists in Mexico and South America. And I've done research, and the book does talk about some of those global connections. There's also another book out a little bit before my book called Abortion Pills Go Global, which is looking at abortion pills more globally. And there's other global connections in my book, but I really just focus on the US. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
And, it's great that you have the history and the politics documented here.
Yeah.
People can see it. One other thing I was wondering about is demographics. Have you done any, collected any data or younger, girls, women,
Yeah.
and or poorer people? I don't know. Is everybody having access to it?
No, that's a great. So there's been a lot.
Parents involved and how that all working.
Yeah, no, there's been a lot of concern about what about people that don't have access to technology, because a lot of this is relying on technology. Although research shows that pretty much everybody has access to technology one way or another. But then it's more a matter of information. How do people, and not just how do they get the information, but how do they get it from somebody they trust in a way that they're willing to try it? And that's when the Plan C community road trip comes in, because they're trying to connect with people on the ground, grassroots activists who are in conversation in communities. And I think ultimately that's going to be what changes the day. When I first started writing on abortion pills in 2018, people didn't know. Only like 10% of the US population even knew what abortion pills were. Thanks to the Supreme Court case last year that, abortion pills, it's much higher now. People know about abortion pills. But then the question is, how do we get the information about these access points? And you can be sure the anti-abortion movement is creating fake telehealth clinics. I'm working on a piece right now about that, and that they're trying to digitally track people. And there's a whole attempt to try to defeat this system. And the most marginal are the people that are the least likely, But so the movement's been very intentional about Spanish, having resources in Spanish and other languages, having Les Libres, which I mentioned Red State Access. Les Libres, which is the name of the Mexico network. They created a Los Libres US, which really worked along the border, particularly Texas before Dobbs, when SB 8 was passed, and then in Louisiana, trying to reach immigrant communities and Spanish-speaking communities. And so, the work's ongoing. The most poor and the most marginal are the hardest to reach. That's true with all kinds of medical care. But the movement is very focused on that and very intent on trying to reach the most vulnerable communities. The nice thing about young people is they're so much on social media. So they're actually, at one level, easier to reach. And by the way, this system defeats parental consent laws in states that, because a lot of those shield state providers, like New York doesn't have a parental consent law. So if you live in somewhere like Pennsylvania, which says if you're under 18, you need parental consent, just order abortion pills from Aid Access in New York. And that's the law so that's been really critical to giving like 17, 16-year-olds access. So, yeah.
Another question. So are they, when you go through, are they using their real name, like through?
You mean when you order abortion pills?
Real name, and then as far as actually paying for them, that's what's on your PayPal, your credit card, or whatever. How actual logistics of
Yeah.
that, so that it doesn't get traced.
These are the kind of questions I was asking that were so nerdy about telling. So it's a long answer, but so if you're getting pills from things like Red State Access, you might not use. You have to use your address or an address where you can get a package, which doesn't necessarily have to be your own address. It just has to be. It could be a post office. It doesn't have, and you could use a fake name. If you're going to be working with a doctor, though, like one of the doctors, like Aid Access or the MAP, they're going to want to. A lot of them don't require a license or an ID, but they're going to be consulting with you, and there is going to be a medical record. Now, it's covered by HIPAA. It's protected information because this is a doctor-patient relationship, and these clinics are all lawyered up to make sure that data is as safe as possible. So for instance, Angel Foster, who heads the MAP, we've talked to her about this. I mean, they go to, like I said, they don't use digital records now. They're using largely handwritten records that they have like in lock boxes with multiple keys, and then they destroy them as soon as possible. They try to collect as little as information as possible. You know, if people want it for free because they don't want to pay, a lot of them will take different kinds of payment that are less noticeable, or the way that they'll charge it, it won't be for abortion pills, it will be, you know, consultation for reproductive health care services, or things that are less hard to trace. And then, you know, the MAP is covered by our law, which protects that provider and that provider's information. You know, but the problem, you know, I mean, you never know how secure digital information is. And that's why I said there's that one provider who does it all by phone, you know, so that there's not any sort of written record. And all of these providers will give you pills for free if you don't want to charge with a card or charge in any way. Yeah. But, you know, that, but remember, this is not illegal. Especially getting pills from the MAP is not illegal. That's legal.
You never know what's going to happen 2 or 3 years from now. I mean, like,
yeah. I mean, this is always a risk.
You know, there's things in Tennessee that are going on.
Yeah.
You know, they
totally.
Get out the window with that.
Yeah. I mean, they're lawless, and so, you know, it's worrisome, definitely. I'm most worried about crisis pregnancy centers. That's my next book, by the way, because they're all about surveillance and collecting people's information and giving it to the cops, you know, to try to, you know, punish people for accessing medical care. So, well, I've gone way over, and I'm already lost half the crowd. But thank you so much for your attention and coming tonight. Yeah. You were a great audience, very attentive.